What happens when a beloved soul singer sits down for what should be a simple morning show interview, only to find himself under attack by one of television's most powerful hosts? In just 12 seconds, a single comment from Whoopi Goldberg would destroy what started as a friendly conversation and send shockwaves through daytime television. The morning started like any other at the View studio in New York City. Teddy Swims, real name Jayton Dimsdale, sat in the green velvet chair reserved for guests, his trademark beard neatly trimmed and his eyes bright with excitement. He had been looking forward to this appearance for weeks. His latest album had just hit #1, and he was ready to share his music journey with America. "We're back with Teddy Swims," announced Joy Behar as the cameras rolled after the commercial break. "Your new album is absolutely incredible. Tell us about the inspiration behind it." Teddy's face lit up as he leaned forward in his chair. "Thank you so much, Joy. You know, this album really came from a place of healing. I've been through some tough times, and music has always been my way of working through pain and finding hope again." Sarah Haynes nodded enthusiastically from her seat. "The vulnerability in your lyrics is so powerful. I think that's why so many people connect with your music." "Exactly," Teddy replied, his voice warm and genuine. "I believe when we share our struggles honestly, it helps others feel less alone in theirs. That's what music should do, you know? It should bring people together." Sonny Hostin chimed in with a smile. "And your voice, my goodness, where did that come from? It's like you were born to sing," Teddy chuckled, his cheeks reddening slightly. "I've been singing since I was a little kid in church. My grandmother used to say I could make the angels cry with my voice. I don't know about that, but I do know that singing feels like breathing to me. It's just natural." The conversation was flowing beautifully. Teddy was relaxed, charming, and authentic in a way that daytime television rarely captures. The audience was clearly captivated, hanging on his every word. Even the crew behind the cameras seemed drawn in by his genuine warmth. "Tell us about your journey," Joy continued. "It wasn't always easy for you, was it?" Teddy's expression grew more serious, but he maintained his composure. "No, it definitely wasn't. I spent years playing in dive bars and posting covers online, just hoping someone would notice. There were times I thought about giving up, when I wondered if I was just fooling myself about having any real talent." "But you didn't give up," Sarah observed. "No, I couldn't. Music isn't just what I do, it's who I am. Even when things got really dark, when I was struggling financially and emotionally, I knew I had to keep going. I had to believe that my voice mattered, that my story mattered." The panel was clearly moved by his honesty. You could see it in their faces, the way they leaned in, the genuine interest in their eyes. This was exactly the kind of heartfelt interview that The View was known for at its best. Then Alyssa Farah Griffin spoke up. "Your fans are incredibly devoted. They call themselves the Teddy Bears, right? What does that kind of support mean to you?" Teddy's whole face brightened again. "Oh man, the Teddy Bears are everything to me. They're not just fans, they're family. They've supported me through every step of this journey, even when I was just some guy with a guitar making videos in my bedroom. They believed in me before I believed in myself." "That's beautiful," Sonny said softly. "It really is," Teddy agreed. "And now that I'm blessed enough to have this platform, I try to use it responsibly. I want to spread love and positivity. I want people to know that no matter what they're going through, they're not alone." The energy in the room was electric, but in the most positive way. This was daytime television at its finest, a genuine human connection being shared with millions of viewers. Teddy was proving to be everything his fans claimed he was: humble, authentic, and deeply caring. But then, something shifted in the atmosphere. Whoopi Goldberg, who had been notably quiet during the first part of the interview, suddenly straightened in her chair. Her expression had changed from politely interested to something harder to read. There was a tension in her posture that hadn't been there moments before. "Teddy," Whoopi said, her voice cutting through the warm conversation like a blade, "let me ask you something." The other hosts seemed to sense the change too. Joy glanced over at Whoopi with a slightly puzzled expression. Sarah's smile faltered just a bit. Even Teddy, who had been so comfortable just seconds before, seemed to pick up on the shift in energy. "Of course," Teddy replied, his voice still warm but with just the slightest hint of caution. Whoopi leaned forward, her eyes fixed on Teddy with an intensity that felt almost predatory. "You talk a lot about spreading love and positivity, about bringing people together. That's all very nice. But I have to wonder, are you really as wholesome as you pretend to be?" The question hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. The other host looked visibly uncomfortable. This was not the direction anyone had expected the interview to take. Joy shifted in her seat, clearly taken aback by the aggressive tone. Teddy, to his credit, remained calm. I'm not pretending to be anything, Whoopi. I'm just trying to be myself and share my truth through my music. Your truth? Whoopi repeated, her voice dripping with skepticism. See, that's what I have a problem with. Everyone talks about their truth these days, like there aren't actual facts that matter. The studio had gone dead quiet. You could practically hear the tension crackling in the air. The audience, which had been so engaged and positive just moments before, now sat in stunned silence. This was not the Teddy Swims interview they had come to see. Sarah tried to jump in, clearly attempting to steer the conversation back to safer ground. Whoopi, I think what Teddy means is… But Whoopi cut her off with a sharp wave of her hand. No, Sarah, let him speak for himself. I want to know what this truth is that he's so eager to share with everyone. Teddy took a deep breath, his hands clasped in his lap. You could see him trying to process what was happening, trying to understand why this interview had taken such a hostile turn. Whoopi, I'm not sure I understand what you're getting at. I'm here to talk about my music and hopefully connect with people who might find something meaningful in it. Connect with people, Whoopi said, her tone becoming even more confrontational. Or manipulate them? Because that's what I see when I look at your whole act. This whole gentle giant thing, this vulnerability, this spreading love message, it feels calculated to me. The accusation was like a slap across the face. You could see Teddy flinch, not from anger, but from genuine hurt. This was a man who wore his heart on his sleeve, who had built his entire career on authenticity and emotional honesty, being accused of manipulation on national television. Joy looked absolutely mortified. Whoopi, I don't think that's fair. Fair? Whoopi turned to Joy with fire in her eyes. What's not fair is someone coming on this show and trying to sell us some fantasy version of themselves. This is The View, not some puff piece morning show. We ask real questions here. The other hosts were clearly struggling with how to respond. This was Whoopi Goldberg, the veteran, the powerhouse, the woman who had been the backbone of The View for years. But this was also completely out of left field, an unprovoked attack on a guest who had done nothing but answer questions honestly and graciously. Teddy sat there for a moment, clearly trying to process what was happening. His eyes moved around the table, looking at each host as if searching for some explanation, some clue about why this conversation had taken such a dark turn. When he spoke, his voice was steady, but you could hear the confusion and hurt underneath. Whoopi, I honestly don't know what I've done to upset you. I came here to share my music and talk about my journey. If there's something specific you want to know about me, just ask. I've got nothing to hide. But Whoopi wasn't backing down. If anything, she seemed energized by his calm response, as if his refusal to get defensive was somehow proof of her point. Nothing to hide, she said, leaning back in her chair with a cold smile. Really? So you're telling me that this whole image you've crafted, this teddy bear persona, this is just who you naturally are? You expect us to believe that? Sunny tried to intervene, her voice gentle but firm. Whoopi, I've met Teddy before this interview, and I can tell you that what you see is exactly who he's been nothing but kind and genuine with everyone here today. Whoopi turned on Sunny with a look that could have melted steel. Sunny, with all due respect, you've known him for what, an hour? I've been in this business for decades. I know a performance when I see one. The audience was becoming restless. You could hear murmurs of discomfort rippling through the crowd. These were people who had come to see their favorite singer talk about his music, and instead they were watching him get ambushed by someone who was supposed to be a professional interviewer. Teddy remained remarkably composed, but you could see the wheels turning in his head. He was clearly trying to figure out how to handle the situation with grace while also standing up for himself. Whoopi, he said quietly, I understand that you might be skeptical. In your position, you probably meet a lot of people who aren't genuine, but I can only tell you who I am and let my actions speak for themselves. My fans, my friends, my family, they all know that what you see is what you get with me. Your fans, Whoopi said with a bitter laugh. Let's talk about your fans. These teddy bears who worship you like you're some kind of saint. Don't you think there's something a little unhealthy about that kind of devotion? Don't you think you have a responsibility not to encourage that kind of obsession? Now the attack was getting personal, and not just against Teddy, but against his fans. The very people who had supported him through his darkest times were being mocked on national television. For the first time since the attack began, you could see a flash of something stronger in Teddy's eyes. Not anger exactly, but a fierce protectiveness. My fans are incredible people, he said, his voice gaining strength. They're teachers and nurses and students and parents. They're people who have been through tough times and found something in my music that helps them feel less alone. There's nothing unhealthy about that. That's what music is supposed to do. Alyssa tried to support him. Teddy's right. Music has always been about connection, about helping people through difficult times. That's not manipulation. That's art doing what it's meant to do. But Whoopi was having none of it. She turned to Alyssa with the same cold stare she'd been giving everyone who dared to defend their guest. Alyssa, you're young. You haven't seen as much of this industry as I have. I've watched people use their platforms to manipulate vulnerable people for decades, and I see the same patterns here. The accusation was so unfair, so baseless, that even Joy couldn't stay quiet anymore. Whoopi, I have to say, I'm not seeing what you're seeing here. Teddy has been nothing but gracious and honest. His music speaks for itself, and his fans respond to it because it's authentic. Whoopi's head snapped toward Joy, and for a moment, it looked like she might turn her attack on her longtime co-host as well. Joy, are you seriously going to sit there and tell me that you buy into this whole innocent act? It's not an act, Joy replied firmly. And frankly, I don't understand why you're being so hostile to someone who's been nothing but respectful. The tension at the table was now so thick you could cut it with a knife. The other hosts were clearly uncomfortable, torn between their loyalty to Whoopi and their sense of fairness toward their guest. The audience was shifting restlessly, and you could hear scattered voices expressing displeasure with how Teddy was being treated. Teddy himself seemed to be reaching a breaking point. He had maintained his composure admirably, but there's only so much unprovoked attack that anyone can take, especially when it's happening in front of millions of viewers. Whoopi, he said, and his voice had changed. It was still controlled, but there was steel in it now. I don't know what your problem with me is, but I'm not going to sit here and let you attack me and my fans without cause. I came here in good faith to talk about my music. If you have specific questions about my work or my career, I'm happy to answer them. But I'm not going to be your punching bag. The studio went dead quiet. This was the moment everyone would remember. The moment when the gentle giant finally pushed back against his tormentor. Whoopi's eyes flashed with something that looked like triumph, as if this was exactly the response she had been trying to provoke. There it is, she said with satisfaction. There's the real Teddy Swims? Not so sweet and gentle now, are you? But her victory lap was premature, because Teddy didn't explode with anger the way she seemed to expect. Instead, he took a deep breath and spoke with a dignity that made her attack look even more petty by comparison. No, Whoopi, this is still the real me. The real me believes in treating people with respect. And the real me also believes in standing up for myself and the people I care about when they're being attacked unfairly. You've been trying to provoke me since you started talking, and I'm not sure why. But I won't let you turn my character or my fans' devotion into something ugly just because you want to create drama. Sarah was nodding along with his words, clearly moved by his response. Teddy, I think you're handling this with incredible grace. Sunny added, I agree. You have every right to defend yourself and your fans. But Whoopi wasn't finished. She seemed almost offended that her attempts to rattle him had failed, that he was maintaining his dignity despite her best efforts to destroy it. Grace? She said mockingly. Is that what we're calling this? I call it deflection. You still haven't answered my original question. Are you as wholesome as you pretend to be? Teddy looked at her for a long moment, and you could see him making a decision. He was done trying to win her over, done trying to find common ground with someone who had no interest in treating him fairly. I'm not pretending to be anything, he said quietly. I'm a human being who makes mistakes, who's been through struggles, who's learned and grown from his experiences. I've never claimed to be perfect, but I do try to be kind. I do try to use my platform responsibly. And I do genuinely care about my fans and my music. If you can't accept that, if you need to believe that kindness is somehow fake or calculated, then that says more about you than it does about me. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Teddy had just called out one of the most powerful women in daytime television, and he had done it with such quiet dignity that it was impossible not to respect him for it. Whoopi's face had gone dark. She was clearly not used to being challenged so eloquently, especially not by someone she had been trying to tear down. Excuse me? She said, her voice dangerously low. You heard me, Teddy replied, his voice still calm but unwavering. I've been respectful to you from the moment I sat down, even when you started attacking me for no reason. I've answered your questions honestly. I've tried to understand where you're coming from, but you're not interested in having a conversation. You just want to tear someone down on television, and I'm not going to let you do that anymore. The confrontation had reached a boiling point. Everyone in the studio could feel it. This was no longer an interview gone wrong. This was a battle of wills between two very different people with very different ideas about how human beings should treat each other. The silence that followed Teddy's words was deafening. You could hear the cameras still rolling, capturing every second of this unprecedented confrontation. The audience sat frozen, unsure whether to applaud or gasp. Even the crew behind the cameras seemed to be holding their breath. Whoopi's face had gone through several shades of emotion. First surprise, then anger, and now something that looked almost like rage. She was not used to being called out so directly, especially not by someone she had been trying to humiliate. "How dare you," she said, her voice shaking with fury. "How dare you sit at this table and lecture me about respect? Do you know who I am? Do you know what I've accomplished?" Teddy nodded slowly, his expression sad rather than angry. "I know exactly who you are, Whoopi. You're someone I used to respect, someone whose work I admired, someone who I thought stood for lifting people up, not tearing them down. But right now, you're just someone who's choosing to be cruel to a stranger for no reason." The words hit like a thunderbolt. The other host looked stunned. Joy's mouth was actually hanging open. Sarah had her hand pressed to her chest. Sunny was shaking her head in disbelief. Even Alyssa, the youngest member of the panel, seemed shocked by the raw honesty of the moment. But Whoopi wasn't backing down. If anything, being challenged seemed to fuel her anger even more. "Cruel?" she spat. "I'm doing my job. I'm asking the hard questions that need to be asked. Not everyone who comes on this show deserves to be treated with kid gloves just because they can sing pretty songs." "Hard questions?" Teddy repeated, and now you could hear the emotion finally starting to break through his calm exterior. "What hard questions? You haven't asked me about my music, my career, my struggles, my growth as an artist or a person. You've just spent the last 10 minutes trying to convince everyone that I'm some kind of fraud without a single piece of evidence to back up your claims." Joy tried once more to intervene, her voice urgent. "Maybe we should take a commercial break and—" "No," Whoopi cut her off sharply. "We're not taking a break. I want to finish this conversation." She turned back to Teddy, her eyes blazing. "You want evidence? How about the fact that you've built your entire career on playing the victim?" Poor little Teddy, struggling in dive bars, nobody understood his talent. It's the oldest sob story in the music business. That was the moment everything changed. You could see it happen in Teddy's face. The exact second when his patience finally ran out, not because she had attacked him again, but because she had dismissed the real struggles of his past, the pain that had shaped his music and his message. "My struggles weren't a sob story," he said, his voice quiet but intense. "They were my life. The nights I couldn't afford to eat, the times I thought about giving up on everything I'd ever dreamed of, the depression that nearly swallowed me whole. Those weren't marketing strategies. They were the worst moments of my life. And I turned them into music because that was the only way I knew how to heal." The raw honesty in his voice was undeniable. This wasn't performance or manipulation. This was a human being sharing his deepest pain, and even some of the hardest hearts in that studio seemed to soften, but not Whoopi's. "Oh, please," she said with a dismissive wave. "Save the therapy session for your fans. We've all been through hard times. We don't all turn it into a career." That was it. That was the moment that broke the camel's back. Teddy stood up from his chair so suddenly that it made everyone jump. His face had gone pale, except for 2 bright spots of color high on his cheeks. When he spoke, his voice was shaking with controlled fury. "You know what, Whoopi? You're right. We've all been through hard times. The difference is, some of us use those experiences to help other people feel less alone. And some of us use them as an excuse to be bitter and cruel." The studio erupted. The audience gasped collectively. The other hosts looked like they'd been struck by lightning. Even the cameras seemed to zoom in automatically, capturing every detail of this unprecedented moment. Whoopi shot to her feet as well, her chair spinning behind her. "Are you calling me bitter and cruel?" "I'm calling your behavior bitter and cruel," Teddy replied, his voice steady despite the emotion in it. "I don't know who hurt you or what made you think it's okay to attack someone who's done nothing but try to share something positive with the world, but I feel sorry for you." "You feel sorry for me?" Whoopi's voice had risen to nearly a shout. "You arrogant little—" "Whoopi!" Joy's voice cut through the chaos like a whip. "That's enough!" But it was too late. The damage had been done. Teddy was already reaching behind his chair for his jacket, his movements calm and deliberate, despite the chaos swirling around him. "Thank you to the rest of the panel," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the studio despite the commotion. "Joy, Sarah, Sunny, Alyssa, you were wonderful and welcoming. I'm sorry, this turned into something ugly." Sarah was on her feet now too, reaching out toward him. "Teddy, please don't go. We can work this out." He paused for a moment, looking at her with genuine affection. "Sarah, there's nothing to work out. Some people choose kindness, and some people choose cruelty. I choose not to sit here and be someone's target practice." He was sliding his arms into his jacket now, his movements unhurried despite the chaos around him. There was something almost regal about his composure. a dignity that made Whoopi's fury look small and petty by comparison. "You're walking out on The View?" Whoopi demanded, as if she couldn't believe anyone would dare leave her presence. Teddy turned to look at her one last time, and his expression was almost pitying. "I'm walking away from cruelty," he said simply. "I don't care what show it's on." The audience began to applaud. It started with just a few people, but it quickly spread through the entire studio. They were applauding not just his words, but his dignity, his refusal to sink to her level, his decision to value his self-respect over television exposure. Whoopi looked around the studio in shock, clearly not expecting this response. The other hosts were applauding too. Joy was clapping enthusiastically, tears in her eyes. Sarah was nodding approvingly. Sunny had her hands pressed together like she was praying. Even Alyssa, despite her youth and relative inexperience, was showing her support for their departing guest. Teddy acknowledged the applause with a small bow, then began walking toward the exit. But he wasn't storming off in anger. He wasn't stomping or huffing or making a dramatic scene. He was simply leaving with his head held high, like a man who had stood up for his principles and was at peace with the consequences. "This is ridiculous," Whoopi called after him, but her voice sounded shrill and desperate now. Nothing like the controlled authority she had wielded at the beginning of the confrontation. Teddy paused at the edge of the stage and turned back one final time. When he spoke, it was to the audience and the cameras, not to Whoopi. "To anyone watching this who's going through tough times, who feels like they don't matter, who thinks their story isn't worth telling, I want you to know that you do matter. Your story does matter. And you don't have to accept cruelty from anyone, no matter who they are or what platform they have." Then he was gone, disappearing into the wings while the audience continued to applaud, and Whoopi stood there looking lost and confused, as if she couldn't understand how her attempt to destroy someone had backfired so completely. The other hosts were left to pick up the pieces, Joy frantically trying to restore some semblance of order to what had become the most dramatic interview in The View's history. "We'll be right back," she said to the cameras, but her voice was shaking, and as they cut to commercial, you could still hear the audience applauding, showing their support for the man who had the courage to walk away from cruelty, even when it was being broadcast live to millions of people across America.